What is going on, guys? This is Trendkill, and welcome back to part 2 of my Smite Beginner's Guide. Now, I say welcome back because if you're watching this video, you have probably watched part 1 where I talk about the basics and I give beginners some tips for starting. If you haven't watched that video, go back and watch that first, so that way this video will make at least some sense to you. You'll have a basic understanding of the game, and now you'll get a basic understanding of what items to buy as you're playing the game. Now, this video was supposed to come out months ago. However, since the release of the first video, Hi-Rez has completely changed how items work in Smite. So I had that first video almost done, and then they flip-flopped everything, and some things were nerfed, some things were changed, and then I kind of got sidetracked. So anyway, months later, finally, here's part 2. Hope you guys enjoy. So for starters, we're going to be talking about several things in this video. Mainly, we're going to be talking about staple items that should be purchased almost every time on any god. We're going to be talking about how the item tiers work, because at first glance, they can be a little bit confusing. We're going to talk about the importance and the strategy of finishing items before you move on to the next item. We're going to talk about situational building, and we're also going to talk about some resources that may help you get started building certain characters. So let's get into the game. Let's take a look at the item builder, and let's look at the categories of items that you can buy. So we've got offensive items, defensive items, utility items, and also a general section of items that doesn't really fall into any of those other categories. So offensive items are going to be just that. Those are going to be items that are going to make your character stronger and deal more damage. Defensive items, obviously, are going to make your character take more damage and defend themselves so they don't die so quickly. And utility items are a mix between the two. Those items are probably going to overlap in offensive and defensive in some way, but they're also going to give you an added benefit of, say, extra movement speed or reduction in your cooldown times. Now up top, we've got things that didn't fall into those categories, as I said before. We've got consumables, which are like potions or things that you would use a one-time use, a consumable. You consume it as you use it. We've got active items. Those are items that are going to give your god 2 extra abilities, whichever abilities you choose to purchase from those active lists. And then we've got starter items, and starter items is a perfect segue of items that you should almost be buying every single time you play a god. Now notice I said almost every time. That's because in a game like Smite, it's an extreme rarity that you're going to build the exact same items every single time you play a specific god. However, starter items and boots or shoes are by far the closest thing to being a required purchase. Now, before we start talking about those things, let's make sure you guys understand the stats on the items before we discuss the items themselves. So starting off in offensive, you can see we've got power. Now, power is your raw damage number. The more power you have, whether it be physical power or magical power if you're playing a mage, the more power you have, the more damage you're going to do. That counts for your auto attacks and your abilities. If you look at the god's abilities, you'll see that they do a base damage of a certain amount plus a percentage of your physical or magical power. So the more damage you have, the more physical or magical power you have, the more damage you're going to do. Attack speed applies only to your auto attacks, only to your in-hand attacks. So if you're playing a god like Anher and you're throwing spears, if you don't have any attack speed, he's going to throw at a very slow rate. But if you build attack speed, obviously you can see that he throws much quicker. So it's going to allow you to do damage faster, but if you build too many items that have too much attack speed on them, you're not going to get enough power, and you're going to do a lot of attacks, but those attacks aren't going to do any damage. So a good balance is always needed. Now, when it comes to lifesteal is probably one of the most complicated stats to understand. If you're playing a physical god, lifesteal only comes from auto attacks, and it is a direct correlation with how much lifesteal you have. If you do 100 damage and you have 50% lifesteal, your auto attacks are going to steal 50 health. Now, the confusing part is when it comes to mages. When mages build lifesteal, they also get lifesteal from their in-hand attacks, their auto attacks, but they also gain a 33% modified amount of your lifesteal on their abilities as well. Now, that is only abilities that are AoE, which is probably 90% of the mage abilities in the game, if not more. Now, if there are abilities that are single target mage abilities, those abilities will get 100%. Freya comes to mind. If she uses her pulse and irradiate together, or just her irradiate, she will get 100% of the lifesteal that she has. Anubis is also another exception in the fact that his passive essentially doubles the lifesteal that he gets from items. So there are going to be times where lifesteal is either important for a character or gives you 100% of the lifesteal, but like I said, 90 to 95% of the time when you use lifesteal on a mage, it's going to be scaled back to 33% of the total amount of lifesteal that you have. Now, if we move on, we've got penetration, and penetration is going to be a stat that's going to reduce your enemy's defenses. Now, you've got two types of penetration. You've got got flat pin and you've got a percentage-based penetration. Flat pin is going to directly subtract the number of flat pin you have from their protection totals. It's a direct number. So if they have 100 protection and you have 15 penetration, that means they're only going to have 85 total protections. Then you've got percentage-based penetration items, and those are going to reduce, obviously, a percentage of that enemy's protection. So percentage-based items are going to be better against people who have a higher protection, whereas flat pin is going to be better against those people who have a low penetration. And last but not least, in offensive, we've got crit chance, and that's obviously your chance to get a critical hit. Now, crit chance only applies to physical gods. Mages do not have the option to crit, and crit chance really only applies to auto attacks. There are a few gods whose abilities crit, but it's an extreme rarity. So mainly when you're talking about crit chance, you're talking about physical in-hand attacks. The higher percentage of chance you have to crit, obviously the more likely you are to crit, and when you crit, that auto attack will do double damage. So the offensive items are by far the hardest to explain. As we move through the rest, you got physical defense, which is going to protect you from physical attacks, magical defense, which obviously protects you from magical, health gives you more health, HP 5 is a fancy way of saying healing over time or health regeneration. You've got aura items, which not only give you bonuses, but also give teammates that are around you bonuses. You got movement speed items, you've got cooldown percentage items, which reduce the cooldowns of your abilities. You've got mana and MP5, which again, mana is going to increase your mana, and MP5 is basically mana regeneration. So let's take a step back and let's talk about starter items. Starter items, basically, if you think about it this way, starter items define your role. If you buy Bumba's Mask, that's because you're probably a jungler. If you buy Death's Toll, that means you're more than likely a hunter. If you buy Vampiric Shroud, that means you're probably a mid or solo lane mage. And if you buy Mark of the Vanguard or Watcher's Gift, that means you're essentially a support or a warrior class. So they're very good items to pick. They're cheap, they're efficient, they give you the stats that you need and the benefits that you need in that specific class, and because they're not super expensive, they're going to provide a lot more flexibility in your opening build. Now, I also talked about boots and shoes and tabi or foot protection, whatever you want to call it, and these are an extremely important part of a build because they're also extremely affordable, extremely efficient, and they're very much role defining as well. If we look at Warrior Tabi, which is arguably one of the most purchased items in the game, we can see that it provides physical power, attack speed, movement speed, and penetration, which are all important for those physical attack power gods. Now, as you're looking at other items, boots may seem a little underpowered because they don't give you a ton of anything, they give you a little bit of a lot. So they're really there to create a base for the rest of your build, plus give you that movement speed that's almost required if you want to keep up or get away from other players. Now, since this is the first tiered item that we're going to be discussing or going to be looking at, let's take a look at the tiers and how they work. So first off, when you buy your first rank of boots, it is +6 movement speed. That's all you get. From there, you have the option of going into combat boots, which is the more damaging side, or you have the option to go into guard boots, which is the more defensive side. Once you go further in tier 2 to tier 3, you then get another split on boots. If you went to the combat boots, you have Warrior Tabi and Ninja Tabi, and if you purchase the guard boots, you then have the option to buy Midas boots and or reinforced greaves. Now, there's one thing that I want to make sure you understand. Depending on which path you take, make sure it's the correct path that you're looking for, because if you accidentally go down the wrong path, you cannot sell just rank 2 of the item and still be left with rank 1. You have to sell the entire thing, so you're only going to lose money by accidentally purchasing the wrong tier. Now, items can initially be extremely confusing, especially if you're looking at them from the bottom up. I would always recommend learning the items from the top down. Now, what I mean by that is learn what happens at rank 3, because at ranks 2 and 3, you get extra bonuses, extra passives, extra things that will happen when you use those items. For example, let's take a look at an item called Deathbringer. At rank 1, it is Hidden Dagger. At rank 2, it is Short Sword, and at rank 3, it finally becomes Deathbringer. Well, at rank 2, you get 20 physical power and 10% critical strike chance. Not really all that great. But at rank 3, a passive of that item is that your critical strike damage is increased by 50%. So if your crits were hitting for 400, now they're going to hit for 6. If they were hitting for 5, now they're going to hit for 750. So this is going to greatly boost the amount of damage you're doing, but as you can see, it's an extremely expensive item to get to rank 3. So now I know you're saying, well, still, how do I know what items to buy? Just because I know what rank 3 does, how do I know that it's a good item to purchase? And you're not going to know that early on. It's going going to take experience. It's going to take playtesting builds and playtesting ideas to figure out what works best, but a great place to start so you know at least some items that you can build. We can figure out why you're building them later, but a great place to start to figure out what to build is a website called tiermonster.com. Now, this website was originally created by a group of people, one of which is now employed by Hi-Rez Studios, the company that makes Smite. And in my experience, this is the only website that I would ever send a new player to figure out which items to use. If you go to tiermonster.com, and up at the top, there's a little section where you can click that says Gods. That will take you to a huge list of all of the gods in the game. If you're playing that specific god, you can then click on that god to get an idea of what you should be building. For example, let's take a look at On Her. So what this website does is essentially it looks at all of the games that are being played that have an On Her in them, and it then looks at how people are building that specific god. So it takes a list of all the items that were purchased, what order they were purchased in, and calculates based on all of that that this is the consensus of how you should be building On Her. So just so you guys understand exactly why this is being built this way, let's go through a small breakdown of how you're going to understand the items once you have more experience in the game. So again, we're starting off with Death's Toll. It's a starter item. It's extremely efficient. It defines your role as a hunter. We move into Devourer's Gauntlets. Now, Devourer's Gauntlets is a stacking item, and we haven't discussed that yet, but what a stacking item is once you get to rank 3 of that item, you now get the opportunity to start gaining stacks for every time you kill a minion and or a god. Now, this particular item maxes out at 60 stacks, so for 2,000 gold, you're only getting 30 physical power and 10% lifesteal. That's not that great, but by the time you finish your stacks, you're going to gain an additional 30 physical power and 15% lifesteal, giving you a maximum of 60 physical power and 25% lifesteal for only 2,000 gold, which in this game right now is an amazing deal. So the importance of building this item second versus like your boots or something like that is because you want to be able to get your stacks going as fast as possible. You want to be building those stacks as soon as you can. Then we get into Warrior Tabi, which you've already kind of touched on, but this is going to give you a great base for the rest of your build. It's going to give you a little bit of everything instead of specifically giving you a lot of one thing. Then we move into Executioner, which is going to give us our attack speed that we want. Not only that, it's going to give us additional physical power and penetration. So attack speed is important because we only have 9% from our boots and 3% from Death's Toll. So this is only going to allow us to start attacking faster. Once you have a great core, we've got plenty of lifesteal, we've got plenty of attack speed, we've got boots, which are going to make us faster, we've got our Death's Toll that's keeping us alive, and it's an extremely efficient way to give us some sustain. Now we move in to raw damage. Rage is going to increase our critical strike chance, giving us a higher chance to actually land a critical hit. And then once you have that ability to land those crits, you're going to move into Deathbringer so that those crits do more damage. Now, a lot of the times when somebody finishes this build, you no longer need your starter item. So some people will go and sell that starter item and buy an additional item. If you look below at some of the pro builds, you're going to see that this first item really starts to kind of change a little bit. That's because those people have sold their Death's Toll, their starter item, and have purchased a situational item that they think is important for that specific game. Now, we'll get into situational building here in a little bit, but first, let's go ahead and go back to the tiers. I want to make sure you guys understand that for each item that you build in Smite, you want to make sure you're finishing that item before you move on to another item. A lot of the times when I see new players, especially coming from like League of Legends, they'll buy rank 1 of an item, then buy rank 1 of another item, then buy rank 2 of a third item, and they've got no items finished. In Smite, it is extremely important to get to rank 3 of an item or rank 2 of an item if that item has an aura that you're looking for or a passive that you're looking for. You need to get to that specific thing that you're buying that item for before it's really worth it. Again, I go back to Deathbringer as an example. 20 physical power and 10% critical strike chance for 1,500 gold is nothing. But when you add that extra 1,500 to it and you finish Deathbringer, you have 50 physical power, 20% crit chance, and all of your crits are increased by 50%. So that third tier is extremely important. Please, please, please understand, finish the item you're working on before you move on to the next item. Now, I also told you we'd talk about situational building, and then I'm going to round this video out. It's getting a little long. However, situational building is probably more important for defensive items, which is a perfect segue of getting into talking about defensive items. Situational building means that if you're playing against a team and they have 4 physical damage gods and 1 magical damage god, well, as a support class, or even as any class really, it's probably a good idea to build a physical defense item because the situation requires it. They have more physical gods than they should have, so you should take advantage of that. There are also items that reduce the amount of healing that people can do for a given period of time. So if you're playing in lane against a healer, it's a great idea to maybe buy an active like Weakening Curse. That's going to allow you to reduce their healing by 100% for 5 seconds, which means if you're playing against maybe like a Hell or a character who has burst healing like that, you may be able to burn them down because the heal that might have saved them will now be negated. And this is why earlier I said almost, because again, your build is not going to be the same every single time because there are going to be those situational things where you're like, all right, I need this item instead of that one. And again, you won't know what those situational items are until you start to kind of get a more understanding of the game, which is why I kind of told you to lean on Tier Monster when you're new. Now again, real quick before we move on to the next thing, do not use Tier Monster as a crutch. Make sure you're actively trying to learn the items. Don't just read Tier Monster and that's it and go by Tier Monster every single time. Understand the items so that you can eventually stop using that as a crutch and start using it as just a resource. Anyway, back to defensive items. You've got physical defense, you've got magical defense, you've got health, and you've got HP 5 items. It's pretty straightforward. If you want to take less damage from physical attacks, build physical defense. If you want to take less damage from magical, build magical. Again, if you're looking at building a support style class and you go on Tier Monster, you'll see which items are popular, but again, make sure you're reading them and understanding why you're using them. A popular item is Breastplate of Valor, but it's popular on more than just tanks, specifically because it not only gives you physical protection and a ton of mana, but it also gives you a cooldown reduction of 25%. So this is an extremely popular item on mages. So really guys, that's about it for making sure you kind of understand how to get started with the items. If we want to get into more detail talking about situational builds and items that are great in certain scenarios, that's fine, but for a basic understanding of the items, I think this gives you enough to go on and you can kind of learn as you're going. Again, use Tier Monster as a resource, not a crutch, but make sure you're learning from it, not just blindly following a build. Make sure you try to understand at every turn why you're purchasing each item. That's only going to help you get better in the long run. So if you guys have any questions or anything like that, please make sure you head down below and ask me that stuff in the comment section. You can also head over to twitch.tv/SmiteGame. That stream is constantly running. There's tons of streamers and tons of information being thrown around on that stream. You can also head over to my channel, twitch.tv/TrendStreamV01. You can also go to TrendKillV01 and it will redirect you to my channel. And I am usually playing Smite at some point in my stream. So if you want to head over and ask questions and be involved in chat, the chat can help you. Myself, I will answer your questions and we'll try to get you started in the game, guys. We really want to make sure that these new players are not just coming out blindly not knowing what to do. We want to make sure you guys have every resource available to make sure that you're getting into the game and enjoying it. So if you guys have any questions, again, feel free to ask and I will see you next time on part 3. We'll see you later.